Once upon a time, a woman wanted a child so very much. She asked a witch to help her. The witch gave her a special seed to plant. And lo and behold, the seed grew into a single flower plant. The woman was so happy when the flower opened and a lovely little girl popped out. She was no bigger than the woman's thumb. "I will call her Thumbelina and give her the best of everything," exclaimed the woman. One night, as Thumbelina slept in her walnut shell bed, a mother toad hopped in and snuck away with Thumbelina in her bed. The mother toad thought Thumbelina would make a lovely bride for her toad son. In the morning, Thumbelina was very upset to see she was stuck with the toads living on a lily pad in the water. She began to cry. A beetle flying overhead heard her cry and went to look at her. "What a remarkable creature," thought the beetle. He picked her up and took her home to his beetle village. The other beetles did not think she was very remarkable, and they told her to go away. Poor Thumbelina left and began to wander alone in the forest as the cold winter wind began to blow. As she wandered, she stumbled upon a small hole. A small field mouse found Thumbelina and offered her a home for the winter in exchange for helping around the house. The field mouse also mentioned her friend the wealthy mole, who was looking for a wife. Just then the wealthy mole appeared to invite the field mouse to see how his tunnel was coming along. Thumbelina followed along and was surprised to see a frozen swallow sticking out of the tunnel. "Oh, don't mind him," said the field mouse. "Be glad you have arms instead of wings," said the field mouse. That night, Thumbelina went back to where the swallow was. She was surprised to hear a faint heartbeat while listening to his chest. She put a grass blanket around him and hugged him close. Soon the sparrow was awake. "Where am I?" "You have saved me. However can I thank you?" chirped the sparrow. Thumbelina promised to nurse him back to health until he was strong enough to fly away. Meanwhile, the field mouse and the mole were making wedding plans, which Thumbelina wanted no part of. The swallow got better and asked Thumbelina to fly away with him, but Thumbelina stayed. The mole arrived to marry Thumbelina, but she did not want to be his wife or the field mouse's maid. "Oh, why did I not fly away with the sparrow when I had the chance?" wondered Thumbelina. Just then the sparrow landed and said, "Better late than never," and scooped up Thumbelina and flew her to a magical land, full of clear water, powdery beaches, and beautiful flowers. The swallow lowered her on a daisy and flew away. Thumbelina noticed a handsome young man perched on a nearby flower. He had transparent wings and a gold crown, and he was just about the same size as Thumbelina. Their eyes met and they fell in love instantly. "I am the king of the daisies," said the young man, as he gestured towards the little winged lords and ladies who peeked from behind all the flower petals. "Would you be my queen?" asked the king as he kissed her hand. "I would be honored to be your wife," said Thumbelina. She was presented with transparent wings just like the king's. All of the king's lords and ladies planned the most beautiful daisy-filled wedding. Thumbelina married the king in the most beautiful garden wedding the kingdom had ever seen. The king and Thumbelina flew into the cloudless blue sky and lived happily ever after in their beautiful flower castle. High above the city stood the fine statue of the Happy Prince. He was gilded all over with gold leaf, and his eyes were bright sapphires. A large red ruby was in his sword. "He is as beautiful as a weather vane," said one of the town councillors, who wished to be known for his artistic tastes. One little boy in the city was crying for the moon, and his mother asked him, "Why can't you be like the Happy Prince, who never dreams of crying for anything?" Everyone loved the Happy Prince statue in the city. "He looks like an angel," remarked the children of the school. Their math teacher asked, "How would you know? Have you ever seen an angel?" "Of course," said the children, "in our dreams." One day a lonely swallow landed on the Happy Prince for a rest. He nestled in between the statue's feet to go to sleep. But just as he was about to fall asleep, a large drop of water fell on the swallow. The swallow saw no clouds and could not understand where these drops were coming from. The swallow looked up and saw the statue's eyes were full of teardrops, and that is where the drops were coming from. "Who are you?" asked the swallow. "Well, I am the Happy Prince," said the statue. "Why are you crying?" asked the swallow. "I was a happy human prince my whole life, and when I died, they put me up here to see all the city's sadness, and so I weep. I can see a very sad seamstress who has a very sick son. She is so very poor. Swallow, swallow, will you bring her the ruby from my sword?" asked the Happy Prince statue. "Oh, but I must be leaving to meet my swallow family," said the swallow. "Oh, swallow, swallow, little swallow, will you not stay with me for just one day and help me?" The swallow agreed to stay and help to be the messenger for the prince. He flew the ruby to the seamstress's house in the night and laid the precious red stone beside her thimble. He cooled her sick child with a flutter of his wings, and the boy began to feel better. The swallow flew back to the prince to tell him all was done. "I will leave tomorrow." "Please, swallow, stay one more night to help me," the Happy Prince asked the swallow. He asked the swallow to take one of his sapphire eyes to help a poor playwright to finish his play. The little swallow snuck into the playwright's room and left the sapphire. The playwright was overwhelmed and could not believe his luck. The swallow returned to tell the Happy Prince how happy the playwright was. The swallow said goodbye, but the prince asked for his help again, to give his other sapphire eye to the little match girl in the square below. "But if I pluck out your eye, you will be blind." "Do not worry, little swallow. Go and join your family now." But the little swallow insisted on staying forever with the Happy Prince. The Happy Prince asked the swallow to take each leaf of his gold to help the poor in his city, and so the swallow did, as the Happy Prince asked, leaving the Happy Prince looking quite dull. The swallow stayed too long, and the cold winter made him very sick. He knew he was going to die. He told the prince he loved him and kissed him on the lips before falling at the statue's feet to his death. At that moment, a strange cracking noise sounded from inside the statue. The leaded heart of the statue had been broken. The city councilors took down the Happy Prince statue as it no longer was gold with precious rubies and sapphires. They found a dead bird at its feet and sent everything to be taken away to the garbage. God was looking down and sent 2 of his angels to bring the 2 most precious things from the city to him. The angels found the dead bird and the broken leaded heart and statue and brought them to God. God thanked them so much. He brought the little swallow back to life and repaired the statue and his broken heart. And he put them in his Garden of Eden for the little swallow to sing forever and live with his Happy Prince statue. A long time ago, a woodcutter lived on the edge of a large forest with his 2 children, a girl named Gretel and his son named Hansel, and his wife who was the children's stepmother. They were very poor, despite all the woodcutter's hard work. One year there was a terrible famine, and there was not enough food for the whole family. One night, the stepmother told the woodcutter they must take Hansel and Gretel deep into the forest and leave them there. Hansel overheard them talking. He told Gretel the terrible plan. Then, Hansel had a great idea. He would fill his pockets with white pebbles to leave a path back to the house when this happened. The next morning, the stepmother said they all had to go into the woods to gather firewood. As they walked deeper and deeper into the woods, Hansel dropped his white pebbles to mark the path back to their house. The next day, Hansel and Gretel returned back to the house. Their stepmother was very angry. She told the woodcutter to take them deeper into the woods. This time, Hansel marked their path with breadcrumbs from his pocket so they could find their way home. In the morning, there were no breadcrumbs. The woodland animals had eaten them all. Hansel and Gretel began to walk through the forest, and suddenly, they could not believe their eyes. They found the most amazing house, made of gingerbread, with a roof of icing and windows made of sugar. They were so hungry, they broke off a piece of the house to eat. Then they heard a voice. "Nibble, nibble like a mouse. Who's that nibbling at my house?" The door opened, and an old woman leaning on a cane frightened Hansel and Gretel. The woman then smiled and invited Hansel and Gretel into her house for a delicious dinner of pancakes and apples. After dinner, she said they could stay for the night, and she made up the beds for them, as sweet and kind as any grandmother. The children had no idea the old woman was really a wicked witch. Before Hansel and Gretel awoke the next morning, the wicked witch carried Hansel to a cage she had built and locked him inside. "Now I can fatten you up so I can eat you." The witch made Gretel cook, so Hansel would grow plump. The children cried and begged to be set free, but the wicked witch just laughed at them. Every day the wicked witch, who could not see very well, wanted to feel Hansel's fingers through the bars of the cage, so she could feel how plump he was getting, plump enough to eat. But Hansel cleverly only gave her an old bone to feel. She thought he was always much too thin for her to eat. Weeks went by, and the witch was becoming impatient, as Hansel didn't seem to be growing any fatter. One morning, the witch ordered Gretel to make a fire in the oven. After a while, the witch said to Gretel, "Climb up into the oven to see if the fire is ready." Gretel asked, "But how can I get into the oven to see?" The witch was impatient and climbed up herself to show Gretel how to look at the fire. Quick as a wink, Gretel shoved the old witch into the oven. Then she banged the door shut. Gretel ran over to free Hansel from the cage. They now had nothing to be afraid of. They explored the witch's house and found jewels and gold coins in every corner. Hansel and Gretel filled their pockets with all the riches and gold coins, and they set out to find their way home. They walked for a long time and finally came to the edge of a big lake. "How can we ever cross without a bridge or a boat?" said Hansel. "Here comes a swan," said Gretel. "I will ask her to help us." The beautiful swan agreed to carry them across the lake. Once they were on the other side, they recognized the forest edge, and they began to run down the path towards home. When the woodcutter saw them running towards him, he cried tears of joy for seeing his children. He did not have a moment of peace since he had left them in the forest. His wife had died while they were gone. The children emptied their pockets of all the gold, rubies, and diamonds. The father could not believe his eyes. The woodcutter, Hansel, and Gretel all lived happily ever after, with the help of the witch's gold and treasures. A long time ago, Mr. and Mrs. Darling lived in London, England, with their children, Wendy, Michael, John, and their sweet dog, Nana. Wendy was always telling her brothers stories about a magical place called Neverland, where a magical boy named Peter Pan lived. No one ever grew old in Neverland. It was full of mermaids, Indians, fairies, and some wicked pirates, too. One night, as Wendy told her brothers a bedtime tale of Neverland, magically, Peter Pan and a magic fairy appeared. Peter Pan wanted Wendy to come with him back to Neverland and never grow old. She agreed, as long as her two brothers could come too. The magic fairy sprinkled her fairy dust to help them fly. And soon, Peter Pan had taught Wendy, Michael, and John how to fly. Back in Neverland, Captain Hook was searching for Peter Pan. He was going to capture him once and for all. Peter Pan took Wendy to the Mermaid Lagoon, while Michael and John went off exploring with Peter Pan's friends, the Lost Boys. In the meantime, Captain Hook had taken Tiger Lily, Peter Pan's friend, prisoner. The captain demanded that Tiger Lily tell him where Peter Pan's secret hiding place is. Mr. Shmee, Captain Hook's helper, was a bad person, and he helped Captain Hook put Tiger Lily in danger. All of a sudden, Peter Pan flew in and rescued Tiger Lily from Mr. Shmee and Captain Hook. He rescued her just in time. Captain Hook had another plan. Mr. Shmee would find the magical fairy, and she would help them find Peter Pan's secret hiding spot. Mr. Shmee found the fairy, and she was willing to help because she had become jealous of Wendy. And Captain Hook promised to leave Neverland and kidnap Wendy to take her with him. Because of the promise, the fairy showed Mr. Shmee and Captain Hook on a map where Peter Pan's secret hideout was. Immediately, Captain Hook said, "Thank you, nice fairy," and then locked her up in a cage. The captain and his crew found the secret hideout and captured everyone but Peter Pan. Captain Hook lowered a bomb into the hideout to blast away Peter Pan. But meanwhile, the fairy had escaped to warn Peter Pan about the bomb. The bomb went off, but Peter Pan and the fairy escaped. But Captain Hook had no idea about that. Happy with his prisoners, Captain Hook loaded them on his ship. He gave them all only two choices. "Become pirates or walk the plank," said Captain Hook. Wendy bravely said, "We will never join you." as she slowly walked onto the plank. She stepped off the end and vanished into thin air without even a splash. Michael and John looked on in fear. All of a sudden, they all heard Peter Pan's voice. He had saved Wendy by catching her before she splashed into the water. A great battle started between Peter Pan and Captain Hook. Peter Pan won the battle and threw Captain Hook overboard. The ship was now Peter Pan's. Peter ordered his crew to sail the ship to London to take Wendy, John, and Michael back home. Peter Pan knew Wendy and her brothers had to return home. Wendy and her brothers were so happy to be returning home to London. The ship reached Mr. and Mrs. Darling's home and dropped off Wendy, Michael, and John. Peter Pan and his friends were not ready to grow up just yet, so they turned the ship around to sail back to Neverland, with Peter Pan and the fairy too. Wendy and her brothers waved goodbye from their window as Peter Pan and his ship sailed out of sight towards Neverland. Wendy knew in her heart she must start to grow up soon. But no matter how old she got, she would never forget her wonderful adventures in Neverland with Peter Pan and all of his amazing friends.